Hello and welcome to the latest webinar in 12D's training webinar series. My name is Lisa Stewart. 12D's training webinars showcase common industry challenges, taking a close look at industry best practices and how these can be implemented using 12D products. The aim of these webinars is to upskill 12D users and broaden their understanding of the capabilities of 12D products. We'll be running these webinars again regularly in the new year and recording them for posting through our website and on YouTube. The previous webinars from this training series, as well as the webinars from our Industry Solutions series and our What's Coming from 12D series, are all available on our YouTube channels if you missed those. During this presentation, you'll be able to type your questions along the way, as shown on the screen, and we'll answer as many as possible throughout the webinar. At the end, I'll read out some of your questions to the presenter for his insights if there's time. Today's webinar, 12DA Library Working Smarter, will be presented by Dylan Ravel, a Regional Sales Manager for 12DNZ with over 16 years of experience in civil engineering practice, land development, drainage, and construction. The 12DA Library is an option in 12D model software that can be used in many different ways. Whether it's used as a quick way to import and place complex 12D model items such as water models or 3D objects, or simply as a quick creation library for drafting and plotting options like standard details, typical sections, and more, this webinar will cover some of the ways that the 12DA library can help you work smarter. Items to be covered include setting up and using the 12DA library to import and edit 12D objects, adding details to cross-section plots, and of course, using the library in conjunction with MPS plotting. Over to you, Dylan.
Thanks, Lisa. So, the webinar we're going to be going through today is the 12DA library. Now, where this webinar came about is I did a few MPS presentations at our recent 12D Tech Forum. And one of the most common questions at the end of those presentations was, yeah, but how good is 12D for creating typical details? And my standard answer was use the 12DA library. And I threw that answer without any preparation, and then I thought, well, I'd better do a webinar about the 12DA library and basically back up what I've been telling everybody is the easiest way to do typical details. So that's where this webinar came about. So what we're going to run through today is what is the 12DA library, how it works, what you can store in the 12DA library and use, understanding the placement of the library objects themselves, and we'll give you a 12D model demonstration of how you might use the 12DA library. So start off with, what is the 12DA library? Well, it's an easy to find storage area for 12D model data, and that data being 12DA or 12DAZ files. The 12DA library is a visual tool to help you see what's inside the file and place that data from those files inside your 12D model project. But it is so much more than just a symbol library if that's what you're thinking that this is used for. It's much, much more. So how the 12DA library works? Well, it looks for a default folder named 12DA library. Okay, so the library directory is the default folder and it looks for one called 12DA library, but you can name that and browse to that whatever you like. It looks for this folder in the standard library search path. So if it looks in the customer library and then the user library and then finally in the library that's installed with the 12D model itself, and I'll show you some of the lots of data that we have sitting in there that when you install 12D, it's already there. So this storage folder, it's going to have subfolders containing 12DA or 12DAZ files. So you can be as deep as you want to in your Windows File Explorer with the folder names. And inside those folders, okay, it's going to have corresponding files. Okay, these folders, wherever you've got a folder, they correspond in the 12DA library option to a group itself, so you can store them under there. And the content of those files will be dynamically scanned and viewed in the option. So when you go and click onto a 12DA file that's stored under one of those folder locations, 12D scans the data and gives you an instantaneous view of what's actually inside that 12DA file. These objects can be imported into your 12D model project, and we'll run through most of those different variations inside the demonstration later on. So what can you store and use inside the 12DA library? Well, essentially whatever you can write to a 12DA file. There is one exception to that, and that's tins. Because tins, you can't insert a tin that already has a tin of the same name in it. Okay, it basically just ignores tins that are inside that 12DA file. But everything else like strings and trimeshes and fills, hatches, and under strings, I also include water strings and nodes and links, text and symbols. So essentially whatever you can write to a 12DA file, you can store and use with the 12DA library. So think big. Don't think it's just a symbol or a plotting symbol. If you have a need for using some data over and over again, no matter how complex, you'll see how handy the 12DA library actually is. It is important to understand the placement of data from the 12DA library. So 12DA data doesn't have to be down at paper 000, okay? Because you might be storing actual project information with real coordinates that you want to insert. We have one customer that had problems finding historical cross-section, river cross-section data. And so we encourage them to use the 12DA library as a depositing point for each year's cross-section information. So then when 12 months went by and they had to compare this year's cross-sections with the previous year's cross-sections, they were right there, and it was really easy to insert at real coordinates and real spatial values. And the spatial size can be really small or really large. It could be a plot symbol, it might be a typical curve detail, or it might be, an entire set of cross-sections. So when you import and click user selected coordinates on the screen, what 12D does is it calculates the centroid or the middle of all of the data that's contained within that 12DA or 12DAZ file. And that's the point that's used for the insertion point, because it can be small, it can be large. It's basically you want kind of the center of that data where you're clicking on the screen. So if you know the exact reference insertion point that data needs to be inserted or placed inside your project data, then we recommend include something inside the 12DA file, which is at the actual insertion point or movement point for that object data that you want to start using inside your 12D model project. So what might you use the 12DA library for? Well, it's your choice. You can use it for a library of complex objects and BIM data to speed up your survey and design production. You might use it as typical drafting objects and details, so you don't have to do those details or find them or draw them from scratch. You might have them as a depository for additional plotting data that can be easily added to the MPS plotting. Or it might simply be a handy, easy to find area for storing and recalling where you've saved 12DA data, i.e. those yearly river cross sections. So again, it's really your choice. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into 12D model, and we're going to give you a demonstration that kind of goes along those what might you use it for. But again, you will find all sorts of different options how you might want to use the 12DA library. So let's get started. There's going to be three mini sections to this 12D model demonstration. First off, I'm going to be using the 12DA library for design elements. Then next, I'm going to use the 12DA library for drafting. And finally, I'm going to be using the 12DA library for enhancing or for plotting using the MPS. I'm using 12D model version 15, and you'll see that I am using the standard theme in a small format. And where that comes from is when you're opening up the 12D project or creating the 12D project, what you can do is you can obviously select themes, which you can go and have a look at some of the other webinars on the themes and what's coming in version 15. So in the 12DA library itself, in the standard theme, where you access that is under File, Data Input, 12D, and there's the 12DA library item there. You can also access it from the quick access toolbar. And in my PowerPoint presentation, I did say that the 12DA library read from the standard search structures from the library installed with 12D or one from your user library, and if you've got one in your project as well. So this one is currently reading from my user library. 12D model version 15 and version 14 comes installed with a whole group of examples inside the 12DA library. The installed ones in 12D come from the library folder itself. So that's the 12D model 15, and you'll see that there's a 12DA library folder there. And under that folder, we have some subfolders. And the way that the 12DA library works is it looks for the subfolders and any 12DA files or 12DAZ files underneath. And if I just copy that path there and close the Explorer, and I'll paste this path into the library directory, you'll see that anything that was a folder within the files itself and any data that's underneath 12DA or 12DAZ files, they'll be there, and the 12DA library scans the file itself and gives you options to actually view that and use that data. So I'll be popping in and out of the 12DA library from different themes of the course during the course of this demonstration. So for right now, what I'll do is I'll leave that where it is, and we'll have a look at using the 12DA library for design data itself. The beauty of the 12DA format is you're writing out absolutely everything, every object type within inside 12D. So whether that be strings or text or leaders, trimeshes, I did mention that it doesn't do tins, but those can be saved away in a file. So you've got easy access to very complex 12D objects that you can very easily import or store to or from particular projects. So just to give you an example on how this might be used, we've got pre-installed items for complex water objects and water solutions. And if I just zoom out and put this in the right place in my plan view, and I'll just change the plotting scale on this view here down to 500 so that text is not so obtrusive. You can have an existing water model, and if you want a complex element, say like a storage tank or a basin, you can very easily add those and enhance your model itself, because you can obviously have water objects that are stored within a 12DA file. So for example, we've got one here which is a storage tank. Now this has all of the nodes and the links already set up for us, so I can choose to either use the models from the file, or I can put this into a predefined model that I want within this project. So I'm going to create a new object tree called 12DA, and we'll call this SW, and I want this put into a model called tank. I can place it on screen or use where it was originally saved in the file, but I'm just going to place it on my screen here at these particular coordinates. If I select import, then that's imported that into this new model called 12DA SW tank. And you'll see that that is a full water items with nodes and links and all the presets that you need with regards to sizes. So if I turn off all the data in my 3D view and just add that tank model, you'll see that it's brought in the water nodes at those presets. So it's a really quick start for complex elements that you can add to your water network. I'll bring in another one here, which is probably the most common one. We've got a basin with culvert, and the idea behind this is, again, you can bring this into your existing model. I'm going to bring it into a brand new model, and I'm going to place it where the basin is actually going to be spatially within the project. And if I import that file and add that to the plan view, you'll see that that's brought in water nodes and water links that have been set up with all of the preset basin standards. And the idea behind this is you can obviously, if I just move that out of the way, if you're going to be enhancing your existing network model or adding this to your network model, the idea behind this is where those inlets are for the basin, you can quite easily go up to your water plan edits and select move, and you can move those inlet locations where they're actually connecting with your existing water network. So it's very quick to get a basin model inside those models, all those complex water elements. So we're just using 12D drainage or water strings, and they're stored away in the 12DA library, and you can use those for real-time design, but have those saved away for when you need them, which is the whole idea behind the 12DA library. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in another 12DA file from the library that's actually just trimeshes. And so we've got this 3D BIM model, and I'm going to insert it where I need to on the job, and I'll only just be inserting one. The interesting thing with the pre-installed 12DI library, we have a whole lot of pre-installed 12D files that actually make other functions in 12D operate. So whether you've seen the BIM object webinars previously, if you haven't, I highly recommend that you go and have a look at those. These files that are stored away, installed with 12D, they actually do some clever things. There's a mixture of tri-meshes in there, and so using the BIM tri-mesh create edit BIM objects function within 12D, which I'm not going to get into in a big way, where it's actually reading this information from the pre-installed BIM library, for example, the roads and the minor roads and maybe a 2-lane highway. If I preview that, they're actually stored away the information for this in the 12DA library. So we use that as a storage area for other functions within 12D as well. And of course, if I wanted to insert many of them, I would be using these BIM objects create options inside 12D rather than just importing them singularly. But you can do it whichever way that you want. So I've got an item here in my 12DA library, and it's from my user library, so I'm just going to reselect that. Actually, I'll show you where you can get that as well from the quick access toolbar, from the data import toolbar, the data input toolbar, the 12DA library item, and that's just accessing it from a toolbar rather than accessing it from the menu item itself. So I've got something in here. This 12DA library has been specifically set up for the webinar, and I have under a water structures folder an item called Rain Garden. And we're just going to try and show you the different variations and how you may use a 12DA library within your organization itself. So this 12DA file has got all of the tri-meshes individually within to create or place a rain garden, and it's got its own models. So this time I want to use the actual models that are inside the 12D file itself. I do want to place it spatially with regards to my design in this particular project. And you can also automatically rotate the data that's in the 12DA file using your rotation mode down the bottom here. So I'm going to choose an anti-clockwise, and I'm literally just going to measure the angle along my road where this rain garden is going to be placed. So that's the angle there. And if I select import, that's imported into the models that were predefined within the 12D file itself. So if I go and add those models, I've got a object models here. It's always slower when you're displaying the screen, called Rain Garden. And that Rain Garden has a mesh subgroup, and under that mesh subgroup, it's got a whole lot of different models that contain the different elements for that rain garden. So I'm just going to turn on the whole rain garden. You'll see that's placed there from the centroid of the file, and it's automatically orientated based on the rotation that I've set when I read in the 12DA file itself. So for now, I'll just close that again. And moving any object in 12D, whether it be tri-meshes or text or strings, my favorite tools are the global tools. And when I flick over to the CAD theme, you'll see that they're front and center. But the translate option, so under the utilities H to Z, these are the global tools, rotate and translate. And the translate is fantastic for once you've inserted something on its centroid from the 12DA library to be able to quickly shift that into place. Now, I've got that insertion point where it should go on a standard New Zealand curve profile. So I have that reference point there that I can use it to move. But in this particular data set, the curve's slightly different. So I'm just going to choose a rectangle. I'm just going to move everything in that rectangle. And I'm going to move it from this insertion point here, and I'm going to move it spatially so it locks onto my top of curve in my actual road, and replace the existing data. And that's going to translate that group of data from those models into the right place. So if I remove all of the information out of my 3D view and turn on the rain garden itself, you'll see that that's from the 12DA file inside the library. It has a whole lot of tri-meshes with its own models, and I can essentially navigate that and place that where it needs to be spatially on my particular site. So you can use any 12D object within the design using the 12DA library, whether it be water strings or tri-meshes or normal design strings, to basically have a really quick start for those complex design objects. The next little sub-item I'm going to go through, that's pretty much using a 12DA library for enhancing or assisting with your design. And the next little bit might be more common way that you think of using something like the 12DA library, which is using the 12DA library to help you with your drafting. what I'm going to do is, for my drafting, I'd like to access to all of my CAD tools very easily. So I'm just going to go and change my theme up here from the standard theme to the CAD theme. And as I flick that through, 12D is going to rebuild the database. You'll see that it'll change all the menus, and it is a little bit slower when I'm recording the screen. So this would generally be a couple of seconds faster. There we go. Okay, so what I've done is I've loaded up the CAD theme, so I now have easy options to all of my CAD workflows, and most importantly for me, my CAD modified toolbars and my global toolbars, which I use a lot when I'm drafting inside 12D. So using the 12DA library for drafting purposes, one thing that's probably quite common if I just go and fire up the 12DA library again is, titles, section markers, scales, and things like that. So I've got a section here called section location, and I've got some symbols under here. One of those is called type 1. I'm again going to use the models from the file, but I could place that into any designated model that I want. I'm going to place that about here, and I'm going to choose the rotation. So I want it basically parallel with the cross section itself. So I'm going to choose an angle, same as these ones through here, and import that symbol. Okay, so this is, yes, it's a symbol, but it's a group of actual 12D items being text and fills, which essentially create the symbol itself. So if I go to the sections, location, and turn on the symbols model that it's been brought in from, you'll see that that symbol's been imported in the right place. And I'm just going to choose the other symbol, which is the end of the section, put that on the other side, import that in, and you'll see that's really easily put in those section markers. And it's again inserted it from the centroid at the 12DA data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish there temporarily, and I'm just going to move this data here within a rectangle, and I'm going to move it from that point to my section location. Do the same thing on the other side, the data within a rectangle to the other edge of the section itself. Okay, so I can place those very quickly from the 12DA library, and the beauty is because they're actual data and fills rather than just a symbol, I can go and edit them. So for example, if that's pointing in the wrong direction for where I'm going to be plotting, I might use some of my global tools like the rotate here. Just move that down a little bit closer, and I want to rotate a couple of strings being the text, so I'll do that one, and I'll also do that piece of text. I'm going to rotate it using my CAD snaps about the center of the symbol, and I want that to rotate 180 degrees and replace the existing data. So that's just rotated those text objects around based on the center of the symbol. And then when it comes to creating your plot, you'll know obviously which sheet that's going to go in. That's just a piece of text. I can simply go in and edit that piece of text and say that that's going to be displayed or plotted on sheet or page number 300. So you can use that for your typical, and that's typical in speech marks, what you would think you might use a symbol library, but we're doing it with smarter data within the 12DA library. And I'm going to go and run a plot. So let's say this is the section that I'm going to be plotting, and just using the typical 12D plotting options, that section about 136, let's say it's section 130, I'm just going to plot a cross-section plot. Section's cross-section. And I've got a PPF file here, which is essentially just a really basic cross-section that will give me the data I want at a scale that I want for the plot itself. So if I read that, it's this PPF file. I'm going to put it at a 1 to 1,000 scale, so it's actually a real scale. And let's say I want to plot between change is 130 and say 140. That's going to plot to a model in an object tree called RS2B01. I just go ahead and plot that. Finish that off, and I'm going to create a brand new view. So if I go view, create plan view, I'm going to call this new view called plot, all uppercase. Move that off to the left half and turn on that new model, which is under plots XS RS2B011. So it's just got minimal text and information on it. If I'm going to want to create a typical cross-section, then I'm not going to want that data. So using my global tools again, I'm just going to quickly do a global delete. Everything inside and crossing a rectangle, so we'll get rid of that data there. And I'll also get rid of the text in the datum line because I'm not really interested in that. And very quickly, from doing a dynamic plot, I've got my cross-section actually plotted out itself. And I've got my pavements design in there, so the tri-meshes have been plotted underneath. And if you don't want your tri-meshes to be plotted as a solid at any time, that's just a fill now in a plot. So you could, draw the face edges and turn off the face fill and decide exactly what you want to plot. But I'm just going to leave those as my solid fill shading for now. And I'm going to use the 12DA library to very quickly enhance this cross-section plot and maybe add some typical items on it using the 12DA library. So this is plotted at a real scale, so that's the actual width of the road. And I'm going to just come up here and reactivate the 12DA library again. And I've got some standard berm details that I saved away in my 12DA library. I'm actually going to insert these in the same model as my plotted cross-section rather than use the models in the file. And I'll place this first one up here because that's going to be the left-hand berm. Okay, and then I might have a 5-meter berm on the other side and then support that. And because they've come into the same model, I don't have to turn that model on in the view. So this 12DA library can contain all of these standard things that you don't want to essentially have to build every single time you do a cross-section plot or a typical cross-section plot. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do some CAD work just to move these into the right place. So hopefully within a few minutes, I'm not going to make it exactly right, but I am going to show you how quick it can be to plot some real data with some real dimensions and then make that into essentially a typical cross-section plot, which always takes time. So I'm going to use my move option to move all of the data here from that point there. It matches to the back of the curve and my standard 3.5 meter berm. Now this one's a little bit different. In my library, it's all on a left-hand side orientation, whereas I'm going to insert this on a right-hand side. So I'm going to use a different CAD option here. I'm going to use the mirror in the y-axis, and I'm going to go L for lasso. And this is the data that will be contained within the lasso. And if I get a steady hand, I'm just going to lasso the data that I actually want mirrored. Accept. Okay, that's pretty much only picked up the pipe work. So then I'll choose my mirror point, which will be that road boundary. And I've just mirrored that left-hand orientation into a right-hand orientation. As I say, I'm not going to make it perfect, but we'll make it look a little bit better. So I'll move all of that text over to where it should be, pretty much on the section. I'll move that text the same there. And this text in here, the justification is not quite right, but I will move a couple of rectangle selections from that point here over to that point there. So I'm not going to make it perfect. That's just to give you an idea how you can use the CAD functionality within 12D in combination with the 12DA library. So finally, I'm going to move that based on a crossing rectangle from that point there. I'll beg your pardon. I'll do that one more time. So move that crossing rectangle from the base point there down to my back of my curve. And you see that's enhanced that typical cross section quite easily. Getting drafting information or CAD information directly from the 12DA library. I will just do a little bit of extra because I'm going to save this away to the 12DA library when I've finished. So a couple of extra details that you may or may not use before. The leaders and the dimensions inside 12D, we've got all those full capabilities. Now, when it comes to doing my dimensions, I only want to snap to the point. So I'm just going to turn off my line snap. I'm going to go and choose my horizontal dimension option. I'm going to type S for style and choose my dimension style and my T for format. Choose my format that I'm going to be placing, and I'll just place a couple of dimensions so you can get an idea of how you can build up these this data and put it into the library. So I've just placed a horizontal dimension. That's a paper scale. I might have an idea that my final plotted scale is going to be a 1 in 100, so I'll just change the plan view scale to show what it should look like when it plots out, and I'll just carry on and place a couple of dimensions just to show you how you can build these things up and then save them away to the library. So the distance from there to there, place that one there, and horizontal distance from the back of the footpath to the berm. And then you may, obviously have a dimension that goes from the edge of the berm, half width of the road, and then you might do one that goes to the full width of the road. And of course, you would do this a lot more carefully than what I'm doing. And extra data, this is coming from the 12DA library. It's actual just strings and text, but if I wanted to save that away as a leader instead, so it's a little bit smarter, I can just do a leader here. Again, I'll just choose my style of my leader and my format. Don't need format. Place a leader text in here. So this might be curb type 1. See details. And you've got your leader in there that you can then go and edit and get it exactly right. So pretty quickly I've gone from a plotted cross-section, enhanced that by the 12DA library and some other drafting options inside 12D to create a pretty reasonable typical cross-section that can be used on my drawing set. Of course, once you have these typical cross-sections, you don't have to create it from scratch every single time. You could, again, utilize the 12DA library to basically place these very, very quickly for you if it's typical detail. So I'm going to go back to the 12DA library. And this time I'm going to have a look at, I've got some typical sections here. I've got a stream upgrade, typical cross-section, all detailed out. I'm going to use the model from the file, and I am going to place it down at paper 00. So if I import that, and then I will just create a brand new view called details, move that across to the side, and turn on that model that I've just inserted. These come into typical sections under roads because I'm using the models from the file within the 12DA library. So, right, you don't have to create those from scratch every single time. You can use parts of the information from the 12DA library like I've done to, help draft it up, or you could have the whole darn thing in. I'm going to insert another one, the local road upgrade. Again, I'll use the models from the file. And then for the last part of the demonstration plotting wise, I'm going to pull in some other standard details. So I've got my standard details. I've got utilities standard details. So where it was saying the common trench details, I'm going to go import on that one. So if I remove those models, I've got my typical details, utilities, common trench. And this has got real paper-sized text. So I know that I'm going to be finally plotting that out at a scale of 1 to 50 for my detail. So I'll set my view up to what I think the final plotted scale is going to be. So you can see I've imported some standard details, and that's a mixture of strings and symbols and text itself. And the beauty of using it from the 12DA library, if I wanted to come and edit that piece of text, because it is text, I don't need note number 10 and note number 9, or rearrange the order or add some different text. You can start off with what your 90% standard notation is going to be and edit it specifically for your project. So that's a standard details. I'll bring in a couple more. I've got a curb type 1 standard detail, and I'll insert that into same models as the file. And finally, I've got some standard notes on the roads, pavement notes, and I will insert or import those from the 12DA library. And that's going to go across to our little final part of the demonstration, which is using the 12DA library for plotting in conjunction with the MPS. So I've created a typical cross-section. I've imported some of those details into models, and I can either use them in a view, edit them, but ultimately you've got the data in there very quickly to use in your 12DA library. So the final part of the demonstration is going to be using that data that we've used from the 12DA library for our finished plot. So I'm going to use the multi-page plots. So I've got one here, kind of already set up. Now it's empty. When you're doing your typical detail plots, you could have these MPS files sitting in your user library that already has, your standard models and everything referenced. So you could quickly add that to your plot sheet and your plot output very, very quickly. So I've essentially just got one page for a typical detail sheet, and at the moment that single page has 2 plan frames. So the 2 plan frames, this one here is for my road section location, and this one is for my trench detail, and they're just, as I say, plan view types. So my road section, I'm going to use the data that I've actually put together inside that CAD drafting. It's going to be at a scale of 1 to 100, and I can then just use the MPS frame, tools, to go and put that exactly where I want that to appear on that particular page. Similarly with the trench, I'm just going to take the data that's coming straight out of a view, but you could use a view favorite instead. That's going to be a scale of 1 to 50, and I'm going to pan that into the final location that it's going to be created. So very similar sort of thing to what you would think, using items or libraries for plots would be. But of course, with the MPS, we've got much more clever tools rather than just having a plan viewport or a plan view frame. So I'm going to enhance this typical detail plot using those different items to give you some ideas. First off, I don't need that frame to be that big, so I'm just going to move that up here, which gives me a little bit of space down the bottom right-hand side. So rather than do a typical plot 2D data, I'm going to actually use a 3D PDF type frame. And I want the 3D PDF part in my details plot to be here, and that's going to be getting that data from the view 3D. And all of this, I know I'm running through the MPS rather quickly, but there's another couple of webinars that you can go and get the details of right from scratch, how to use an MPS file itself and all these different frame types. If I didn't want an interactive 3D PDF, I just wanted a screenshot of basically what was sitting on this 3D view here in the background, I could use a perspective type frame rather than a 3D PDF, and I'm going to put that right on the same place. And so I've got a different frame type. But if it's just standard details, standard notes, I've used the 12DA library to import those into particular models. And I don't even need a viewport to plot that data on an MPS frame. I can use the model type subnode in an MPS. So to give you an example of how that works, I can just create a model reference, and I'll call this one stream crossing. Ooh. And that's going to be using that typical section road local stream crossing at a 1 to 100 plot scale. And I can then just use that whole data that's referenced in that model and place that anywhere on my plot composition that I want, just using a model frame. So you could have all of your typical cross sections and your model references already done and sitting in a pre-defined MPS file, so it'll be really quickly to create your detailed sheets or your typical detail sheets. And the beauty of the MPS is, even though that's inserted, that's going to make a mess, it's far too big, I can just deactivate that subnode. So I can have that typical cross-section sitting there to plot on a page if I need it, if I've got that, say, on a chapter level. So I am going to create one that fits, which is my typical section local road upgrade. And again, that's at a 1 to 100 scale. And I'll just pan that on the view, so where it's going to be in its final plot. So the top one is the one that I've created and drafted up using my hand. This is one that's come directly from the 12DA library, all fully prepared, that I can just use in my plots. And we'll call that one road upgrade. Try and give my subnode some good names. And then last couple of things, I inserted my typical curve detail from the 12DA library, and I also inserted some notes. So they're both, again, model references. So we'll call this one curve, and that's going to be pulling the typical details curve type 1. Now this isn't drawn at real scale, it's basically drawn at a plotted scale already, so I don't need to apply a scale factor to that one. And you'll see how, all of the 12D elements, including fills and hatches, they've come through directly from the 12DA file. That's the beauty of having that from a 12DA library as opposed to a symbol itself. And finally, I will do one more reference to finish off this plan preparation. We'll call this notes. And I'll use that model reference, typical details, typical sections, notes, pavement notes. And again, put those to where that's going to be finally on my plot composition. So pretty much all of this data, apart from the plotted cross-section, has come directly from the 12DA library. And I've put that all together into something that's semi-coherent to essentially create a plot. So I'm going to write that file back again, and I'm going to go and plot that sheet or that page. Again, when it's sort of recording the screen, it takes a little bit longer. but that will pop up with the completed PDF file from the 12DA library creations in just a moment. Okay, here it comes. So what we've got here is our finished plot composition from data using the 12DA library. We've got our CAD'd up typical cross-section. We've got our directly imported typical cross-section. We've got our typical details and our standard notes that have all come from the 12DA library. And we've also got this wonderful little interactive 3D PDF frame here. So you can do stuff with that. So if you're giving a standard plan and section of our rain garden, enhance that with some of the other cool features within the 12D MPS. And the beauty of this is I can obviously go and turn on and off, I can turn off models or layers. So I can turn off the media and I can turn off the vegetation, and you've got this interactive part to your plot. Again, the majority of this has come directly from the 12DA library, and I've only spent about 15 minutes putting it together, so you can imagine, to get it absolutely right, it would be very, very complementary to not only design modeling, but also your drafting and your plotting. Now, the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to export that typical cross-section that I created from plotting and drafting back into my 12DA library. So that's something that I might want to use on different projects in different areas. And it is purely just a 12DA file. So if I output the 12D data, I'm just going to output everything in the view. So if that had different models, I could import using the models within the file. And it needs to go into your final 12DA library destination, which in my case is the userlib folder. And it's going to go into typical sections. But if that's getting a little bit too large and I want to group those a little bit easier, I can just simply have different subfolders. And I might create a folder called extra sections. And I'll write that data out to that 12D file. We'll call this typical CAD section, the file name itself. Write that out. And that, because that's under the standard location for the 12DA library itself, whenever I go and fire up my 12DA library option, I now have under typical sections another subsection called extra sections here. Let's move that a little bit bigger. And under the extra sections, I've got the typical CAD section that I have just written out. And that's very quickly able to be used on different multiple projects from sitting there within the 12DA library. So in summary, basically what we've got here is using the 12DA library in different aspects, and you guys will come up with lots of different ways to use that, whether it's for your design, whether it's for your plotting or drafting, or if it's just for storing things away that you know where they are, that you can come and grab them in different projects really easy. Hopefully today I've demonstrated how useful the 12DA library is for work within 12D model itself. So I will take it back to Lisa for any questions.
Thanks for that, Dylan. We've had a few questions through. I'll start with this one. Bruce has asked, would it be possible to cover again where to set the insertion point when creating the 12DA library?
Exporting this entire 12DA data, it will store the real coordinates. So if I use the coordinates from the file for the insertion point, that will bring that back in at that exact projection or world coordinates. But if I was just inserting it and placing it on the screen using a placement, I'm going to want to pretty much ensure that all of the data, or the middle of the data essentially, is where I click my mouse for the placement. So it will actually scan all of the extents of the data. It'll calculate the centroid, or essentially the midpoint of all of that data that's contained within the 12DA file. And when I pick a point on the screen and hit go, it will basically come in that area there. Now, if that was just something like I had with the rain garden, and I needed that rain garden to be inserted at a particular point, then I can essentially do a real insertion point on that data. And that's for design data, that's in both X and Y and Z. So if I need to link that exactly to the lip of the curb, once I've imported it, it may figure out that point as the insertion point, then I can quickly move it from that real insertion point into the real data that I need. So hopefully that explains that one. It kind of does a quasi calculation of the center of all of the data within the 12DA file.
Great. And Paul has asked, if you have previous creations of typical sections created in CAD, can you import them straight to the 12DA library for use in 12D?
Oh, you'd have to do one step first. So obviously, if it's a CAD, if it's a DWG file, you can either copy and paste that, directly into 12D using the CAD copy paste, or import the DWG file, do any little cleanups that you want into the model, and then it's just in one way into 12D. And once it's inside 12D, you can absolutely write that data out as a 12DA to the appropriate folder location. So yes, it's very, very quick to get existing details from CAD and export those to the 12DA library. There's just that interim thing of getting it into 12D so you can write the 12DA file itself.
Thanks. And can we import a 12DA file to a WNE drainage.4D file?
With the standard 12DA library, all these items that are installed with 12D Model 14 and 12D Model 15, they are not all of them, these ones there, they are water or drainage string objects. So they import those in, and then you can go straight to your WNE, click on that item. Now, if you have imported that into your previous water network that's got all of your hydro files and all of your model settings, it will instantly inherit all of those settings for the WNE from the previous model. If you're just inserting it into a new model and then firing up the WNE, there is some base settings that make it work, that you may just need to specify your particular hydro file and your methodology for your rainfall method. But yes, absolutely, from the 12DA library, it's insert straight in, fire up the WNE, and away you go.
Thanks, Dylan. Would it be okay if you showed again setting the insertion point when creating the 12DA library, just from that first question, because I realise now we didn't have visual on that. So
yeah, absolutely.
If we can demo that again,
okay, so
I'll
just write that again. Right, so basically what I've got here is I've got my rain garden, and inside that rain garden, I actually have a 1-point string that's got a symbol on it, and that's in real XY relative space. So if I go and place that on the screen here, I won't worry about a rotation this time. And if I add that to the view, okay, so I actually have this super string or 12D 3D string, which is just 1 point, that has an absolutely valid height as well relative to the top of the rain garden. So if that was the lip of the curve position, I've actually saved that insertion point away inside the 12DA file itself. So even though it might be placed slightly off where I've set it, I can very quickly use those translate tools, snap onto that X and Y and Z position, and then snap onto my corresponding design position, and it will shift it by using the translate tools in both the X and Y and the Z position itself. So if I remove all of that data and go and add the rain garden data, it's pretty hard to see, but I actually do have a very, very small yellow dot there that's come in with the original 12DA file, and that's my insertion point that I can use as a reference to locate those complex models in the right place.
Brilliant, thank you. So I might just take one more of these live. Can we save a CAD file as a block in the 12DA library?
CAD file as a block? Well, a block in CAD is a symbol inside 12D. So it's a symbol type element that can be inserted. And yes, the 12DA library writes out symbols and strings and trimeshes and tins. So the answer to that would be yes. but you're probably not going to want just a simple symbol. You're going to want a block, which is a combination of different 12D object types that you'll save away to the 12DA library, very similar to what I had in my section location symbols and even titles. That might be a symbol in itself, or it might be 12DA data, and it's a combination of everything. So if you want to edit it very easily, like just editing text, then have it as text. If you don't want it edited, it's just going to be what it is, a symbol or a block, then you can absolutely save that symbol away to the 12DA library.
Okay, thanks for that, Dylan. Sorry to those whose questions we didn't get to live today, but I'll email any of those through to Dylan after the presentation. And a couple of people asked whether the recording will be available. So yes, the recording of today's webinar will be available in coming days through the webinars page on our website and on our 12D Model YouTube channel. We'll also email the link to everyone who registered, so keep an eye on your emails for that one. And also for announcements of details of the new webinars in the new year. If you need to contact us in the meantime, you can always pop on our website and shoot us an email. That concludes our presentation for today. Thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you at future webinars.